Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Cathy Hannabach, for those of you who don't already know me, and I'm the president of Ideas on Fire and the founder of Grad School Rockstars. For those of you who are new rock stars, welcome. I'm very excited to have you in our community and look forward to talking with you about your goals and how the coaches in the community can help you reach those. For those of you who are old hats, you're awesome. I'm excited to see you here, and I'm also looking forward to talking with you about building your professional community. Just a few logistics things before I jump into the topic at hand. If you notice on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat room. It has a few chat boxes in there that I've put in there. If at any time during the presentation you have a question about anything that I say or a follow-up, or there's something you want me to address that I don't get to, you can pop it in the chat room there. You can also talk to each other in the chat room there. And the other option to ask a question is found at the bottom of your screen. There is a button that says Ask a Question. If you click that, you'll be able to type your question in there, and I'll be sure to get to it in the Q&A. So you can either put your question in the chat room, in which case I'll get to it, or you can use the Ask a Question button. Either way, I'll be sure to answer it in the Q&A, which we should have time for at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen, and we can go ahead and get started talking about building your professional community. Let's get this up here. We want to do full screen. Come on. Okay. So what's on tap today? I'm going to talk about how and why a professional community is your #1 career asset. I'm also going to talk a lot about what that means. What is a professional community? How do you build that professional community? As well as point out ways that you're already in the process of doing this. I'm also going to talk about how to identify awesome people that you want to be part of your professional community, some of whom you already know, some of whom are already in there, who you're already working with in various contexts, some of which you may have heard of, but don't know in any kind of direct capacity yet, and some of whom you've yet to identify. So we'll talk about how to identify the people that you want in your professional community. I'll also talk about how to connect with those people in a way that fits your specific mode of communication. There's often a lot of fear around networking, around community building, on talking to people, particularly if you're like me and are an introvert, or really if you're like most academics on the planet. This is something that can be kind of intimidating. But I'm going to talk about ways that you can identify the modes of connection that you already are good at, and use those to connect with the people that you want to be part of your professional community. So it's not a matter of learning a brand new thing, but about adapting the ways that you already work the best to this new task or this new goal. I'm also going to talk about how in building your professional community, it's super important to emphasize reciprocity. This is the section that, as I put on here, AKA don't be a jerk. Like with all relationships, whether they're personal relationships, professional relationships, familial relationships, pet relationships, we want your professional community interactions to be reciprocal, so that you provide, you give as much as you're asking other people to give to you. I'm also going to talk about how to feed and nurture those relationships. So a professional community is not something that is built once and left alone to stand and exist throughout all time. But like all relationships, your professional relationships, your career relationships, those relationships that form your various careers that you have across your life and help you build those various careers you have across your life, those relationships need tending to. So I'm going to talk about how you can build in regular nurturing, feeding, and maintenance time to ensure that your professional community is thriving. And then finally, I'm going to talk about putting your professional community or your network to work for the specific goals and ambitions and needs that you have for your particular situation. Okay, so when I say that your professional community is your number one career asset. You might be asking why. If you're here, you're a very smart person. You got into graduate school. You're building a career in a variety of ways. And you might think of community as one way in which you're building that career. But I want to emphasize today that careers, whether they are careers in academia, whether they're careers in nonprofits, whether they're careers in companies or organizations, whether they're careers in government, any careers that you could possibly be building at this point, they're built through three main things. The first one of which we're going to talk about today, is people. We've also done a lot of webinars on the ways that your career is built through you obtaining and honing and getting better at specific concrete skills. So for example, we've done webinars on how to develop your skill as a public speaker, how to get more comfortable getting in front of audiences, how to get more comfortable identifying what different audiences want. Another concrete skill that you are in the process of developing in graduate school is your skill of writing, right? And of writing for specific audiences. And we've done several webinars about how you can develop that skill for writing for various audiences. And finally, careers are built through knowledge. Now, as an academic, this is the area that you're probably most familiar and comfortable with, right? So we're not going to talk a lot about that today. But knowledge both of specific industries and specific fields. So for instance, if you're building a career as a professor of women and gender studies, or a hopeful professional professor of women and gender studies, knowledge that you'll use to build that career is not just kind of the content of those fields. So what are the current debates? What are the current scholars? What are the kind of current issues? But also knowledges about how the academy works, right? So careers are built through these three main things: people, skills, and knowledge. And today we're going to talk about the people part of that. I want to emphasize that your careers are bigger than the jobs that you currently have. And you'll have several. And your professional community, along with those concrete skills that I was talking about a minute ago, are what let you build those various careers and transition between them across your life. So what are some of the benefits of a professional community? And here, when I say professional community, I mean the various kinds of people, organizations, and groups that you connect with through the work that you do in the world. That might be people that you directly work for, your supervisors, your bosses, your department chairs, if you work in an academic department. They might be people that you supervise, so people you're in charge of. They might be your peers or your colleagues, people who are on the same level as you. But they're also people that work in other industries or have other positions or work in other fields, right? Your professional community is the sum total of all of those relationships. That managing editor at the academic journal you worked with to get that particular piece published. That it includes the director of the local nonprofit that you worked with to plan a particular film screening in your neighborhood. It includes the staff members that you worked with at your local university to get things like student loans paid, or get any kind of administrative information that you needed for your graduate program. Those are all members of your professional community. In addition to the people that you might immediately assume are part of that. So people you directly work with on a project, or your dissertation advisor, for example, right? So what can your professional community provide? This gives you some insight into why this community is your number one career asset. It will get you farther than any skill you ever have or will ever learn, and it will get you much farther than any knowledge you could ever develop. Your professional community can provide job interviews. They can tell you about job openings to begin with. They can provide career advancement opportunities and promotions. Your professional, for instance, if you work in the academy, if you're a professor in the academy and you're going up for tenure, people in your professional community, people that you know, people that you got to know in graduate school and have continued relationships with over time, those are the people who are going to be writing your tenure letters, right? Professional communities can also provide learning opportunities. You can learn new things by talking with people in your professional community. Maybe you find out that someone that is in your professional community speaks a language that you're curious about. That might be an opportunity to talk with them about it, get some resources, figure out ways you might learn more about that language. Your professional community can be enormously helpful for changing career paths. As I mentioned, you're probably going to have more than one career in your life, as most of us do in this economy, which is only going to increase over time. And so as you switch between career paths, whether that's switching career paths within the academy, whether that's transitioning outside of the academy, whether that's coming back into the academy if you start out outside of it, right? Your professional community can provide enormous resources and support to do that. Your professional community can also provide role models. They give you a sense of what can be embodied in a single person, or in this case, multiple people, right? They give you a sense of what is possible. Your professional community can also provide enormous support through the difficult stuff. All career journeys have challenges, for sure, right? Some of those challenges are individual. So those are things that only you are experiencing because of your particular situation. Many of those difficult challenges are structural. So they're things that everybody in that position or a similar position is experiencing some version of, right? And some of them are just pretty universal. Work's hard sometimes. All jobs are hard sometimes. All jobs suck sometimes, right? But your professional community can provide support through those challenges. Your professional community can also provide insights into industry shifts and trends. And this is going to be enormously important as you start to take a longer view of the careers that you're going to develop over the course of your life, right? So right now, as you are all in graduate school, because this is a Rockstar specific webinar, chances are you're focused on the current career that you're building, right? Probably involves finishing your dissertation, probably involves finishing your coursework if you're at that stage, and it probably involves getting your PhD and then getting some kind of a job that pays you money, right? After that. Might be in the academy, it might be somewhere else, but that's probably where your primary focus is right now. And that's fine, that's good, right? But as you start to take a longer view, you start to realize that how industries shift and change, how the industry of higher education shifts and changes over time, shapes the opportunities that you have both within the current job and in the current career that you're building, and opportunities beyond that, right? And your professional community can serve as a bellwether in this case. When you have people in your network who are at various different levels in their careers, some of whom are just starting out, some of whom are at a kind of mid stage, some of whom are more senior in their careers, some of whom are retired from their careers. And you get a large enough group of people who are working in and have experience in different industries, you start to notice big patterns, right? And this is enormously helpful as you take that kind of longer view of your work over the course of your life. Your professional community can also provide creative projects and opportunities. Oftentimes, the most fun projects or tasks or things that you get to work on that are just enjoyable often come through your professional community, but not necessarily in ways that you might immediately expect. For instance, maybe you partner with somebody at a local nonprofit to put together a volunteer day for some organization or particular cause that you're passionate about. That's a professional interaction, right? Even if you're not paid to do it. And those connections, those opportunities, those possibilities come through your professional community and those networks and relationships that you've built over time. Your professional community can also introduce you to others. So even if a particular person in your professional community, say your dissertation advisor, or say a colleague who works in a neighboring industry, maybe they don't have a particular answer on a question that you have, but they can point you to the person who does, right? They'll introduce you to other people, and your community and your networks can build in that way. Your professional community can also provide friends. Not everybody in your professional community will be a personal friend of yours. That's normal. That's fine. But many of them can be. Right? And finally, your professional community, because it's a community, because it's more than you, because it's more than one person, it can provide opportunities to create the kind of change in the world that you're wanting. If you found your way to grad school rock stars, you care to some degree about social justice, about social change, about politics, about making the world better in some capacity, in whatever form you've chosen to work in. And your professional community, those relationships that you build over time through doing work with others, can provide those kinds of possibilities. Okay, so assuming I've convinced you that your professional community can be incredibly beneficial, let's talk about how to actually build it, right? So the first step I want to talk about is identifying awesome people. Now, this is a continual process, and to some degree, you are already doing this, even if you don't give any conscious thought to it, right? You meet people through the course of the work that you do, through your work as a graduate student, through your work as a TA, through your work as a graduate student researcher, through your work as a community member, as a neighbor, as someone who lives in the town or city that you live in, as someone who is physically present on the campus or campuses that you are present on, right? You interact with people. Some of them you choose to build relationships with, right? People who are intriguing, maybe you ask them out for coffee. Maybe you work with them on a project. Maybe you met through some publishing opportunity. Maybe you connected with them at a conference. Some of those interactions you choose to pursue. Some of them you don't, and that's also perfectly fine, right? So to a certain degree, you're doing this already, but I want to give you a framework for how to do this with more intention and how to keep up the relationships that you build that you want to keep going. Because this is something that often graduate students in grad school rock stars ask the coaches about. It's like, well, maybe at this last conference that I went to, I got really great feedback from this person, and then I just never followed up. And it's been like 7 months, and they probably don't remember me anymore. And I'd really like to be their friend, or I'd really like to work with them on something, but now it's just kind of awkward, and I can't really like reconnect with them at this point. Right? So I want to give you a framework for thinking more proactively ahead of time about how to form the relationships that you want to do the things that you want to do in your career. Okay, so step number 1, think about which industries would help you do your current career or your current job better. Obviously, all of you are graduate students, so in this case, higher education would be a clear industry that would help you do your current job of graduate student better, right? Now, which industries would give you options beyond that current career or job? Are there maybe industries that are adjacent to higher education, that are separate from, but that are kind of close to or interact with higher education, that might give you some options for the future? Maybe you're curious about academic publishing, right? An industry that is adjacent to higher education, it's entirely separate from, but it interacts with. Maybe you're curious about nonprofits. Maybe you're curious about government positions, right? When I say curious, I do mean curious. You're allowed to just have kind of questions about, I'm curious, what does that industry look like? What are the options in there? You don't have to have a specific career goal, like I want a job in a certain type of government policy, unless you do have that goal, in which case you're skip a couple of these. But it's okay to just be at the curious level, right? So what industries would help you do your current job better? And then which industries would give you options beyond that current job? Next, which positions, otherwise known as job titles, would help you do your current job better? So for instance, if you currently are a teaching assistant for a class, right? Connecting with other teaching assistants would help you do your current job of teaching assistant better because you can learn things from them. Professors would also help you do your current job of teaching assistant better because they're doing a similar action, teaching, but they're ahead of you in that process. So learning from them how to be a better teacher, how to give better lectures, how to design better assignments, how to put together better syllabi, how to ask better discussion questions to get students talking, right? Those are things that would help you do your current position of teaching assistant, in this example, better. Which positions or job titles would give you options beyond that current job? Next, which networks, these are connections between people, communities, would help you do your current job better? Maybe you notice, for example, that there's a group of senior scholars in your area who all seem to know each other. Their work references each other. They seem to be actual friends. They seem to hang out. They post about each other on social media. It's how you know they hang out, right? They hang together at conferences, and they seem like they would help you do your current job better, right? Also, which networks would give you options beyond your current career? As I said, if you're interested in academic publishing, what are the academic publishing networks that would give you some insight into that industry and give you some options, help you figure out what your options are beyond your current career? Also, which people would help you do your current career better? And which people would give you options beyond your current careers? Now, if you notice how I've split this up, industries, positions, networks, and people, these are 4 different scales, right? Industry, sorry for the very loud noise outside the window. Industries are the largest scale, right? We're talking about higher education. We're talking an industry like healthcare, an industry like insurance, an industry like nonprofits, an industry like publishing, right? These are giant industries under which there's a whole host of positions and companies and organizations and people and projects and ways to interact with it, right? But industry is that broader umbrella, that biggest umbrella. Positions are actual job titles, right, within individual industries. But you'll also notice that positions stretch across industries. So the same job title can exist in multiple industries, right? For example, social media management, social media marketing manager, there we go, is a job title that exists in the healthcare industry, that exists in the higher education industry, that exists in the nonprofit industry, that exists in the publishing industry, that exists in the editing industry, that exists in a whole bunch of other industries, right? Networks are smaller than that and more interdisciplinary than that as well, too. So networks might stretch across industries and stretch across job titles, right? And then finally, people is that smallest scale. So individuals that either you've encountered, you've met them before, or that you just know about their work in some capacity, you've heard about them, right? So think in these 4 scales when you're trying to identify which things would help you do your current job better, and then which would give you options beyond that. And then finally, list out just who do you want to hang out with? And this you don't necessarily need a particularly amazing professional reason for. Who do you think's kind of cool? Who do you think it'd be fun to be friends with? Who would you want to be around just because you think they're incredibly smart and want to pick their brain about something? Right? This can be idiosyncratic. That's okay. But once you've identified these kinds of categories, right? Which industries, which positions, which networks, and which people, then you're going to go through and list actual humans for each of those categories that could fit the bill. Now, think both big and small with this. So think about people that you already currently know of. Either maybe you are familiar with their work, but you've never met them. Think about people that you do already currently know in person. They might be your current friends. They might be your current colleagues. They might be your current dissertation advisor. They might be one of your students, right? And also think about big people. This, again, we're just making lists here, right? Is there someone who is really famous in a way that you are curious about how they work? You're curious about their career journey. You'd love to hear their take on your industry. Write them down. We're just making lists here. It's important to keep in mind that different people in your professional community, just like different people in your personal communities, provide different things. You can't expect one person to be everything to you, right? You can't expect one person to be your mentor for all of life. Instead, you're putting together a team, a community, a group of people, a network made up of individuals who all offer specific things that they're experts in, right? Maybe you have a colleague who's really fantastic at writing syllabi, and one of your goals is to write better syllabi and improve your pedagogical work, right? They could be an awesome resource for that. But maybe they're not so awesome on time management. Maybe they suck at it. So don't go to them for time management issues, right? Maybe your neighbor who works in a completely unrelated industry, who has a completely separate job title from you, is a rock star at time management. They'd be a really good addition to your professional community because they can offer you resources and advice and information and skill development opportunities on that specific thing, right? So it's a matter of continually identifying people that can teach you something that you want to learn. And adding to that list, changing that list as your own career goals, your own ambitions, and your own situation changes over time. So if that's how you identify awesome people, you have this list, right, of industries, of positions, of networks, and of individuals that you want to connect with to help you do your current career better and give you options beyond that current career. How do you actually connect with them? So I want you to think about the ways that you like to connect. Forget the list for a minute. How do you prefer to interact with other humans? Are you, for instance, the life of a party? Do you really love being in groups and entertaining groups by, say, telling stories, recounting tales? Are you the person at a party who has captivated the attention of the room while you tell a really funny story about something that happened to you last week? On the other hand, does that completely freak you out? And instead, you prefer to be the person in the corner talking with one person about a specific thing, and the idea of talking to a crowd is completely undesirable to you. That's fine. Do you prefer small groups? Do you prefer online interactions? And if so, what kind? Right? Because we're really in an era where that's not really like one option or the other. It's more like, how do you like to connect online versus do you like to connect online? So figuring out ways that you individually, you with your idiosyncratic personality, how do you like to connect with other people? What are your preferences around that? What's your personality around that, right? And being okay with those preferences. You do not need to be the life of the party. Conversely, you don't need to be really good one-on-one. Maybe you work better in crowds, right? But identifying those modes of connection, those methods of connection that you prefer and that fit with your personality and your situation and your energy levels and your resources, figure out what those are. How do you like to connect? Once you've written that down, once you figure that out, I want you to think about I want you to go back to that list that you made, right? On that previous slide, we were talking about this list of people that you could connect with, potential people you could connect with. Where do they hang out? Are they going to a particular conference on a regular basis? Are they in a physical geographic location? Do they tend to be concentrated in specific cities? Or regions of the world? Do they tend to hang out on certain social media platforms? Do they tend to have conversations at specific kinds of events? Where are they already hanging out? Now, you're probably going to have multiple answers to this question, because this list that you made when you were identifying awesome people that could be part of your or are already part of your professional community, chances are they're in multiple locations, right? That's okay. But list those locations out. Maybe some are on Facebook. Maybe some are on Snapchat. Maybe some all go to the Modern Language Association conference every year. Maybe a lot of them seem to congregate around New York at the various organizations and universities and institutions in like the greater New York metropolitan area. Wherever those are, list them out. Now take those two lists and see where they overlap. So the list of where are those people hanging out and how do you like to connect? Where do those things overlap with one another? For instance, say you tend to like smaller groups that are focused on specific topics rather than large crowds that are more kind of generically social, things like parties or things like receptions. That's not your thing. Instead, you like smaller groups where you can talk about a kind of preset set of topics where everyone's there to talk about this specific thing. Maybe that's your jam, right? What places that those people are hanging out fit with that mode of connection? Maybe Facebook groups that are organized around a specific topic would be a really good overlap for that, where all the people on there are there to talk about that specific thing, right? Not anything, but that specific thing. That might be a good overlap for you. So look at where the people you want to connect with are hanging out, the ways you like to connect with people, and see where they converge. Go to those places. They might be physical locations, in which case you might go to specific events in your neighborhood. You might go to specific events on your campus. You might go to specific conferences. You might go to specific Facebook. You might join specific Facebook groups. You might attend Twitter chats on a regular basis, but go to there. Hang out there and contribute to those communities before you ask anything of anyone, right? You are going to the place where the people you want to connect with already are hanging out, and you're hanging out with them. The goal here is for you to get comfortable in those spaces and get comfortable in those communities. Some of those communities you probably are already going to be a part of, right? Maybe there's a specific conference that you already attend on a regular basis, and it turns out a lot of people that you want to hang with also go to that, right? In which case, great, keep going there. And you can figure out ways that you can meet more of the people that you want to meet and maintain and kind of help feed or maintain the relationships you've already built in that specific conference space, right? So that overlap is where you can start to build your professional community. In terms of connecting with these awesome people that you've identified, I'm going to encourage you to make a plan. Oftentimes, relationships and relationship building, community building, network building, whatever it is that you want to call it, whatever terminology you want to use, oftentimes people leave this to chance, right? And up to a certain point in your career, that's easier for some people than others, right? Particularly if you are still in graduate school, which you all are, you are physically around people in a career that's in some way connected to the one that you're building, just by virtue of being on a campus in a similar program, right? But as you move throughout your career, those networks are going to get much more geographically dispersed. And so setting up systems for you to connect with people, to identify people you want to connect with them, and maintain and feed those relationships over time and over space, the better your career can develop accordingly. So you might, for instance, make a goal of connecting with a certain number of new people each month, or each quarter, or each year, depending on how much time and energy and resources you have to devote to this. You might, for instance, make a goal to ask for a specific number of informational interviews every quarter. Maybe you want to do one informational interview every 2 months with a new person. Maybe you want to have coffee every month with a new person. Maybe you want to have coffee every month with an existing connection that you have, an existing friend or colleague, right? Make a plan for that ahead of time. Because chances are, particularly when you get into the hustle bustle of the semester, when student papers start coming in, when you're buried in grading, when you have to prep for next semester, when your dissertation chapters due, when, oh crap, when is that R&R due back to the journal? Now I have to start thinking about job applications. These are the kinds of things that can drop out of view. Human connections drop out of view when you start to get overwhelmed by things like that. And you will start to get overwhelmed with things like that. We all do on a regular basis. It's a pattern. You'd think we'd learn by now, right? But those kinds of social interactions, and here social refers to these professional connections, right? People you engage with through the work that you do in the world. This needs to be given priority too, because these, as I said, this professional community is what gives you those other opportunities. So prioritizing it ahead of time, putting it on your calendar, putting it on your to-do list, putting it in your project management system, convincing yourself that it's not optional, that it's part of the work that you're supposed to be doing rather than a distraction from it, can ensure that you have a robust professional community that serves you in the careers that you want to build for yourself. Okay. So in these professional relationships that you're building, it's important to keep them focused on reciprocity. It's important to give as much to that community as you take from it or that you ask for from it, right? So you might, for instance, think about identifying what you can offer to each person in your network. Now, some people in your network you're going to have very loose ties to, so this isn't a super big issue. You know, a friend of a friend or a colleague of a colleague who maybe you've met once and that's pretty much been the extent of your interaction. But some are going to be more, you're going to have more of a strong connection with, or you're going to want more of a strong connection with, right? So you can think about what are their professional goals, their professional needs, and their professional ambitions. What can you offer to help them achieve those goals? This is pretty basic relationship building stuff, right? It might be couched in slightly different terminology, more professional terminology than you're used to thinking about in relationship to your personal relationships, but your personal relationships work the same way, right? How do you create connections with people? How do you create connections with people that you're dating? How do you form those relationships, and then how do you nurture those relationships? Chances are it involves caring about what they care about, right? And contributing something to help them in that thing, right? That can be in the context of personal relationships. That can be more kind of supportive things like listening to them talk about their goals and maybe offering advice or offering sympathy if it's something they feel sad about, right? But this translates into professional context as well. What can you offer to help people achieve what they want to achieve? The goal here is to stay on people's radar, right? For instance, maybe you come across an article about a current event that you know your dissertation advisor is super interested in. Or maybe you come across an article that offers some advice on something that a colleague of yours has been asking questions about. Send it to them. Say, oh, I thought of you immediately when I saw this. Hope you're doing well. Maybe check in on something if they've been working on something. Here's this thing. Here's this resource, right? The goal here is to just be a human, be nice, right? Pass along something that they might find useful. Don't be artificial about this. If the current event article that you read really has nothing to do with that person's interests at all, don't send it to them. Send it to the person who is interested in that thing, right? But the goal here is to consider other people, right? To consider the people that you want to connect with. What do they care about? What's on their mind? What's going on in their lives? And help them out with that stuff to a certain degree and with the resources and time that you have to spare, right? I put two good resources on here, a couple blog posts that we've posted on the Ideas on Fire blog recently. One about how to be a good mentee, which gives some more goals, gives some more advice on kind of maintaining relationships. And then another one about finding non-academic mentors, which is also helpful for finding academic mentors. A lot of the processes are similar. Okay, so now that you've created this professional community, you've identified people you want to connect with, you've indeed connected with them, you've created reciprocal relationships, you provide support and value to the people that you care about. I want you to think about tending your garden. And this slide has a lot of metaphors, some of which are mixed on here, so I apologize for that. But like any relationships, your professional relationships are living entities. They need continual care. They need feeding and pruning in this gardening metaphor that I'm using here. And they will also, and they should morph over time, because you as a person morphs over time. Your goals change. Your situation changes. What you want and what you need will and should change over time. And so the professional connections, the relationships that you have, the time that you give to different of those relationships, those will morph and change over time, and that's perfectly fine. That's normal. That's good, right? So but there are ways to kind of to maintain the relationships that you have as you all go through these changes. So some examples of tending to your garden or maintaining these relationships that you've spent so much time and energy creating. You might consider scheduling regular time to tend to those networks. This might happen on a monthly basis. It might happen on a weekly basis. It might happen on a quarterly basis or an annual basis. This is going to depend on your situation. It's also going to depend, it's going to be different for different individual relationships. Some relationships you might need a kind of a monthly check-in. Other relationships, maybe an annual catch-up at a particular conference or event is fine, right? This is going to depend on those specific interactions. Another way to kind of maintain these professional relationships is to make regular support dates. This can be as simple as having a monthly Skype date with somebody that you just check in, like, what have you been working on this month? Is there anything you have questions about or you want feedback on, or you just want to, you just kind of want to process, or you don't need advice, you just want to talk through something? Maybe this happens on an annual basis, right? It depends on the interaction and what you all need in this situation. Another way that you can help maintain and kind of keep those relationships going is to promote people's stuff, right? In our careers as professionals, we make a lot of things, whether that's publishing books and articles, whether that's founding organizations, whether that's completing giant projects, whether that's teaching courses, whether that's winning awards. We do a whole bunch of different kinds of creative projects, right? That take an enormous amount of time and that we take an enormous amount of pride in, that we worked really hard on and we're really proud of. Promote that stuff, right? If your friend published a really awesome book, tell people about it and tell them that you're telling people about it. If someone you know just finished a big project that they've spent years on and that was a really big kind of accomplishment for them, celebrate that. Celebrate it with them and celebrate it to others. Tell other people about the cool people that you know. That's a big part of relationship building and relationship tending, is tell other people about the cool people that you know. Not because you're bragging about how cool you are for knowing them. This is super important. It's part of that how not to be a jerk when doing this. But if you think that your friends and your colleagues are really amazing, and you should, and if not, you should get new friends and colleagues. If you think that the stuff that they make in the world is really amazing, tell other people about it, because more people should know about that amazing stuff. Another way you might do this is create a folder for articles or resources that you come across in your life, so that then you can send those to people that might be interested. Again, don't send stuff that people will not be interested in, right? And you'll get a sense of this when you kind of make those connections. But if you know someone, for example, in your professional community who's super interested in indexing, right? In learning more about book indexing. If you come across some resource about book indexing, send it to them. Say, this made me think of you. Do you already know about this? That can be enormously helpful. And it also means that they'll probably be spurred to do that for you as well. Okay. And finally, put your network to work. Oftentimes, graduate students need some help with this part, right? Even the most kind of social ones often need help with this part. And this does get easier over time, for sure. But I want to emphasize that it's okay to talk about your goals and your needs. You can be ambitious without being a jerk. Indeed, that's called having a career, right? Having a career means having goals for that career, wanting to do things in the world, having ambitions for what you want to create and who you want to create it with and for, right? And you can talk about those things. Oftentimes, graduate students, particularly in the fields, particularly those who come from marginalized communities and work in fields that foreground marginalized communities, undersell this. And those who come from more privileged positions oversell this, right? But I want to encourage those of you who are maybe not so comfortable with this, who maybe underplay your goals, your ambitions, and your needs. I want to encourage you to be more confident about those. You're allowed to have them. You should have them. And you're allowed to talk about them. What are you trying to do? You're in graduate school. You're writing a dissertation about something. Why do you care about it? What are you trying to do in the world? What are your goals? What are your ambitions? It's okay if they're not completely set yet, right? But you're allowed to talk about those with people. You're also allowed to ask for what you need from people. You've built this amazing professional community, right? When you need help, you can ask for it from that professional community. This is something that graduate students are often very hesitant to do. And I understand why. I do. But I want to encourage you as much as possible to be bold about this. Do you need someone to read through a piece that you wrote to see if it's ready to submit to a journal? Ask someone. They can say no. That's perfectly fine. And don't ask the same person every single time you need something, right? That's kind of disrespectful and obnoxious. But chances are you're not doing that. Figure out what you need and ask people for it, right? You can also give people easy ways to help you. So let's say, for example, you are planning a course for next semester on some topic. And you've gotten most of the syllabus set, but there are a few open spots. And you want to know if there are some texts on a specific issue that would be best to teach in that section. Maybe you put out a call to some folks in your network. Hey, I'm teaching this class. I'm looking for resources to fill in this final section on X topic. Do you have any good recommendations? The reason why that's a good setup for that ask is because you've already done work. You haven't said, I have to plan a syllabus. People, what should I assign? In which case you're asking other people to do your job for you, which is plan your syllabus, right? In this example, you've already done that work. You have one specific question. You have one specific topic that you need some input in. You've demonstrated that you've put in kind of preliminary work. You've probably already looked up some options for that section, right? I came across, I need a couple more texts for this section on transnational feminism. I am considering assigning this text, or this text. Are there maybe some other ones that would be better to swap out? You've demonstrated in that instance that you've already done your homework, right? You're not asking people to do your work for you. You've already done work, and you're asking for other people's input to help you make this a better class, right? So give people an easy way to help you. I also want to emphasize that your network, this professional network that you've built and that you've maintained over time, you can call in your chips for them. When you have something that you really need and it's big, you can ask for it. Now be judicious with this. Obviously, don't do this for every single little thing you need, every single reference, every single letter of rec, every single question that you have about a job application, every single syllabus you're planning. Don't do it for everything, right? But you can call in your chips when it matters. If you're changing careers, you're making a pretty radical career shift, and you need some help getting set up in a new industry, that's a pretty big thing, pretty big life change. Call in your chips. If you've built strong relationships, if you've contributed to people's lives, if you've helped them with their goals, if you've been considerate, if you've been a good friend, you've been a good colleague, you've been a good supervisor, you've been a good employee, you've helped people, you can call in your chips and say, I need you. Can you help me do this thing? Again, they might say no, which is totally fine. Or they might say, I can't, either because I don't know how to do that thing, or I don't have the resources to do that thing, or I don't have the time right now to do that thing. But here's someone who can, right? So when you get to big stuff, you can call in your chips when you need to, if you've put in the work ahead of time to build strong relationships, right? And a final thing I'll say, professional community, this is just life advice, but it's also professional community building advice. Always thank people who do nice things for you. This might seem obvious. I hope it's obvious, but it's a good reminder. Thank them privately. Acknowledge that they went out of their way to do something nice to you that helped you. Tell them how it helped you. If somebody wrote a letter of recommendation for you, tell them how it helped you, right? Tell them about the job it helped you get. Tell them about the grant it helped you get. Tell them how you spent that grant. Tell them what publication you got out of that grant, right? Thank them privately, profusely, and honestly. When it's appropriate, in the context when it's appropriate, thank them publicly, right? If someone nominated you for something, for a prize, for example, and that information is public, thank them publicly. If assuming you got that prize, or even were just nominated, which is often a pretty big honor, right? And finally, reciprocate. Thank them, acknowledge what they did, and then do something for them. It doesn't have to be automatic, right? It doesn't have to be like, you helped me today, so I need to reciprocate. I need to come up with some manufactured way to reciprocate tomorrow. But when they need to call in their chips, for example, when they need some advice on something, when they need some feedback on something, be the first in line. This is just how you maintain good relationships, right? It's also how you build a strong professional community. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back, maybe, possibly, if this will work. There we go. Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions about building a professional community, maintaining a professional community, and putting your professional community to work for your specific goals and situation. Okay, does not appear to be any questions, which is fine. I will post a link to the slides in the chat room in a minute. A bit after this webinar ends, so actually in about like half an hour, you should get an email with a link to this replay video as well as to the slide deck. If you have any lingering questions, or if you are watching this on the replay and it's after when this airs and you have questions, you can always connect with me or any of the other Rockstar coaches in our Rockstar community in office hours. Just a heads up, our upcoming events, our upcoming webinars for November and December. We have 2 in November and 2 in December. Coming up on November 2nd is a Rockstar exclusive webinar on revising seminar papers into publication. So those of you who have lingering seminar papers or are currently writing seminar papers and are curious about what to do with them afterwards, this is a really great resource. Next, on November 14th, we have a public webinar that's open to the public. Please invite anyone who you think might be interested. And that's going to be focused on turning your dissertation into your first book. So if you just filed your dissertation, if you're about to file your dissertation, if you know anyone who is curious about publishing their first book, this is going to be a really fantastic webinar on that. In December, on December 7th, we have a Rockstar exclusive webinar on dealing with rejection and kind of how to productively roll with the changes and challenges of graduate school and of academic and non-academic careers. And then finally, on December 19th, we'll have our final webinar of 2017. And that is going to be, that's a public webinar. Anyone is welcome to attend. And that is going to be focused on money management for graduate students. All that stuff that they never tell you about when you first enter graduate school, and then you have to figure out how to deal with while there. So thank you all for coming. I hope to see you at our next webinar in November, and I hope to see you in the Rockstar community. Have a great rest of your week.